Hello and welcome to week 6 of Workout Wednesday Power BI edition. My name is Megan Longoria and I'll be taking you through this week's solution. This week we are creating a simple report with a matrix, a couple of column charts, and a bar chart, and then making sure our axis labels are easily readable. Let's look at the example to see what we're trying to build. Here's my report about the Austin, Texas Animal Center intakes and outcomes from 2014 to 2021. It starts with a slicer where I can select a year and see data for only that year. You'll see all 4 visuals change as I select a different year or clear my slicers. Then we have encounters by animal type, which is a matrix that uses 2 measures that we've put on the rows, a column chart that shows the outcomes, so what happens to the animal as they leave the animal center. And it's got a little bit of longer labels, and we want to make sure that those labels are readable and not diagonally oriented. Same thing with this bottom bar chart. We want to make sure that our labels are horizontal and not truncated. And then this bar chart is about animal breeds. So it has a rather long list and a scroll bar, but we're using it in conjunction with these other visuals. So I could click dog and then see only the dog breeds, or cats and do the same thing there. You'll notice that as I click any visual, the other visuals on the page are filtering as opposed to cross-highlighting. We see only the values related to the category I chose to cause that cross filter. If we go to the blog post and scroll down to the requirements or the dataset section, there is a link that will take us directly to the download for the PBIX file to start with. So you'll see this OneDrive link and you can just click download and then you can open the file. When you open the file, you'll see the blank page for you to start building your visuals, and then a second page that has data source information. So you can see the original source data that came from 2 different links on the Austin, Texas Open Data Portal. And then if you need some help figuring out how to accomplish the requirements in this challenge, here's some extra links for you. Before we start building, let's take a quick look at the requirements for this week. It is a fairly long list, but we can get through them pretty quickly. First, we download the data set for this week. We need to set a page filter so that we see only years after 2013. We need to create the matrix that shows intakes and outcomes by animal type and put those measures on the rows. We want to create the column chart to show outcomes by type. And we're going to set our text size to at least 9 point. And because Power BI is responsive, what you set is not exactly how it gets rendered because it's trying to fit within its allotted space, but that's okay. You can go ahead and set it at 9 point. And then we want to make sure all our axis labels have a horizontal orientation and are not truncated. Our column chart for animals by sex is the same thing. And then we create our bar chart to show outcomes by breed. Again, make your text size at least 9 points and format your bar chart so that the y-axis labels are not truncated. Then we add our slicer with our year values and change the slicer header to read "Select a year to filter the data," just as a friendlier title. And then we set all our interactions between all visuals to filter because some of them by default are on cross-highlighting. And then we find how many parakeets were adopted in 2020. And you can see in my finished report that I have it formatted in a specific way with a background image and my choice of colors, that's entirely up to you. In the requirements, I left you a link to this background image if you'd like to use it, but you don't have to. Feel free to design as you see fit. So let's get started. First, I'm going to filter my page. So I have my fields in the field list on the right, and I have a year column, which I'm going to drop into the page filters. And it already opens to advanced filtering, so I'm going to choose greater than 2013 and click Apply Filter. Then I will create my matrix. So I need animal type, intakes, and outcomes. And those went to the wrong places when I just checked the box, so we're fixing that. And notice the intakes and outcomes start out as columns, but I can change that. And here is the secret to that. Turn on show on rows, and now we have something that looks more like our finished product. And then we can format that a bit. I tend to keep my styles somewhat minimal, and you'll see that I used a sort of monochromatic color palette with dark blue and gray. So I'll come back and get all of this formatted later. But I'm going to go ahead and add my column chart. And since we're only using one measure, it doesn't matter if you used stacked or clustered, it will result in the same chart. And I want to choose outcome type and outcomes. And notice when it first gets created, everything is on a diagonal axis. So we have to make it a little bigger, and then we can also set our maximum size to 50%. And you'll notice as I change this up, at some point it becomes horizontal. And I am putting descriptive titles on my column chart, so I don't need the axis title. So turning that off, which gives it a little more room. We want to make sure that our x-axis is at least 9. Same thing for y-axis, text size is at least 9 points. And I'm using the Tahoma font, but you can choose your font of choice. So I just copied and pasted. Since I'm using the same measure, I can just switch this category out. And then I'll add my bar chart. So this one is also outcomes by animal breed here. I'm going to make that take up most of the vertical space here. And we can see that these labels are pretty truncated. A good portion of them end in the ... So we need to go to the y-axis and set our maximum size to 50%. So that means up to 50% of this chart's container space can be used for those labels. And again, for this particular report, I don't feel the need to have titles. They take up a lot of room when I've clearly explained them in the title of the visual. So that gets us partway there. now we need a slicer for year. So I'll add a slicer, choose year, and sometimes it's easier, even though you have dates, to just do a horizontal slicer. And the way you get that is by changing your orientation, and it'll resize itself as you change the size of the visual. Instead of just saying year here, I would like it to say something a little more descriptive. So I'm going to say select a year to filter the data. And then I want to go and change all my interactions to be filter. So right now, if I click a bar, we see cross highlighting happening in the other bar charts. So I'm just going to start with my matrix, select it, click Edit Interactions, and then change the interaction to filter. Then I select this column chart. Your matrix will already be on filter, just change the others to filter as well. And then go through, filter. That one's already done, filter, filter. Your slicer is always going to be either filter or ignore. Move that down a little so we can see it there. So now we've got the main elements of our report, and we can start formatting it a little bit. I added a text box for a title and said Austin Animal Center intakes and outcomes. And I'm going to make that 18 point and this dark blue color and bold. And I still need to add my title for my matrix because those are turned off by default. So I'll say encounters by animal type. And make sure that color is what I want it to be. And then just check that my values all use consistent colors. I don't want any kind of colored background on these. But I don't always like that the total is so bold. So I'm going to soften up my grand total a little bit. And make sure that applies to the label as well. And then I formatted my slicers in a particular way to match. So I'm going to go to items, make sure that's set to the right color and background color. And then I wanted them to stand out for accessibility and good color contrast, so I chose an outline. And the outline color is under General. And then I gave it a border. And made it rounded. Just move that over a bit. Now I think it's time to add my background image. Change the transparency, set the image to fit. And now we can see that by default, all of our visuals have the background turned on, and it's just a plain white background. So I can turn it off on the slicer. And what I did for the other visuals was actually leave the background on, but change the transparency to 80%. And then I turned the border on, but I made the color that light gray and made it rounded as well. And I'm going to end up with this positioned about right there, so I'll go ahead and do that. And so we just get a very light background. You could have turned the background off. You don't have to have the border. In fact, I almost never design with borders unless they're very, very light, because people tend to make them draw more attention than the data, which I think is a bad practice. Make just a little more room here. And sometimes it comes down to pixels, finding out where the chart flips over. So you just have to adjust a little bit. And then we'll turn this border on. And change our background transparency. And we'll come back and adjust layout at the end. All right. Then we just need to work on alignment. If you click the Format tab, you can align top. You can also see the helper lines when things get in alignment. I'm going to resize these just a little. So this one is about 200 and this one is 200. And then I can place them. And if I select these three, I can align left and then distribute vertically. Make sure the bottom there is aligned and there's a little bit of space between. And I added just a couple of extra things like a data as of, and all this is a card that is populated with the as of date measure I have in there and has the category off and the data label set to 11-point font. And I added a button, which is not required, that takes me to the data source information. So the button just has button text that says data source and Power BI info and a medium gray font color, 11-point Tahoma font. I used the information icon. The important thing is the action. And so the action should be of type page navigation and data source information. And then once you're happy with your formatting, just go through, do a usability check. I try to make sure I have all my accessibility features in there. So again, the colors and the background image are your choice, but this is what I chose. And of course, we need to fulfill our last remaining requirement, which is to find out how many parakeets were adopted in 2020. So I'm going to choose 2020, select birds, and then if I control select adoption, that will cross filter over to here and we can see that the answer is 9. I hope that you enjoyed this week's challenge and that you'll join us next week for week 7.